I think we have seen the rise of AI. Both Satyajit and Sandeep refer to that. It's being used in every field. But a lot of the narrative around the world is about the impact of AI on jobs. What AI does, machine learning, techniques of AI, is that increasingly that only human beings could do earlier. At a very rapid pace, a very frightening pace, because it means that a large number of jobs, or desk jobs, are getting automated. A good example is kinetic thing is happening in autonomous cars. And there is, as you know, a big push around the world to see how cars can become self-driving. That they don't need drivers, and there's a lot of work going on across the world. And it is expected that in the next 10, 15, certainly 5 to 10 years, that a large number of vehicles will be driving by themselves. They won't need drivers. And just the estimate, for example, of truck drivers in the US is there are 2 million truck drivers in the US, and you won't need those truck drivers 2 years, 10 years, 5, 6 years from now, because all the truck driving by themselves. So this is really a direct all the technological advances. These cars sensors which are able to detect they use AI algorithms on data to figure the possible actions to be taken, and then they initiate all of themselves. And this is not science fiction. Today it's happening. I mean, companies like Waymo, which is a subsidiary of Google, has already done several million miles of driverless cars in Phoenix, Arizona. And you can expect that, at least in some parts of the world, you'll see fleets of these autonomous cars in the next few years. And this is going on to other fields. So whether it's, the talk about medical diagnostics using AI, which will make doctors less required and so on. So a lot of the narrative which is there around the world about AI is really about how AI will lead to job loss. And you would have seen that kind of thing. So that's on the one side, the technological implications of AI. On the other side, the question comes is how do we create jobs in India? Because India is perhaps the last young country in the world at scale. I mean, Africa is young, but it's 54 countries. On a single country, India is the youngest country at this scale, because China started aging and now is actually going to go through a very rapid aging because of the one-child policy. But India is going to have young people, for the next 25 years. And if you look at the last 60, 70 years of global development, countries that modernized and became richer and created jobs for their people essentially had two big elements to it. One was they rode the wave of globalization. And the globalization wave was something which happened from the fall of the Berlin Wall through China joining the WTO and so on. So we have seen last 30, 40 years a huge amount of globalization. And for many of these years, most of those years, the rate of global trade growth was higher than the rate of GDP growth. In other words, these 30, 40 years, we saw the countries of the world becoming more interlinked through trade, which was a phenomenon that happened. And there were really two drivers for it. In the physical world, it happened because of containerization. And the container came into being about 40, 50 years back. And containerization dramatically reduced the cost of moving physical goods. Dramatically, therefore, you could produce in China and ship it to the US. And in the digital world, you had packetization. So the whole internet, which had the concept of packets of data flowing between points, allowed you to dramatically lower the cost of communication. So the lowering of the cost of physical movement through containerization, the lowering of cost of digital goods through packetization, essentially laid the foundation for a massive globalization that happened. And all the countries, whether it was Japan, whether it was Southeast Asia, whether it was South Korea, whether it was China, all, when they had young populations, leveraged globalization to produce for the world. And those led to them having huge number of jobs, factories, and therefore, and then getting better and better at the products they made, from shoes to software to planes. So they did that. So they were able to ride the wave. The second major thing that all these countries was leveraging the rise of manufacturing. You have today a million people making shoes, and all of that went into Western markets. So the combination of rise of globalization and using mass manufacturing was really the basis for job creation. Now, unfortunately for us, both these avenues have been, in some sense, disturbed. The first is we are now seeing, as you can see around the world, a lot of reaction to globalization. You're seeing the challenges between China and in fact, global trade is actually now growing less than GDP growth around the world. In other words, you can actually see the numbers that all the factors that we looked at for globalization, which is trade and so all of them are slowing down. And therefore, the idea that India can export its way out of poverty is less and less likely, simply because the terms of global trade are no longer as hospitable as they were for other countries over the last few decades. So the globalization aspect is coming in the way. The second thing is that manufacturing itself is becoming more and more automated, and therefore, people when they think of highly, factories with very few employees, robots, factoring, whatever, and that trend is continuing today, where across the world factories are investing more and more in technology for manufacturing, really creating that many jobs. I mean, today, for example, in Pune, the biggest employees with 42,000 employees, it's all services. There's no manufacturing happening there. So the combination of the sort of pushback against globalization and the fact that manufacturing is becoming automated means that the fundamental construct that developing countries used was to produce, manufacture, create jobs, and export is not available to us. I think this is a very important and profound issue. And this is happening exactly at the same time that AI is further, impacting on jobs. And therefore, we have to think very hard about how to solve this job problem, because we're going to have a very young population for decades to come, a young population with high aspirations, the young population that is exposed to mass media and the internet, is aware of how the world lives, and who has dreams and aspirations which have to be met. And therefore, we really have to think hard about how do we create and enable jobs in this new world of AI, in this new world of deglobalization, and this new world of automation of manufacturing. And therefore, I think the way to think about this in India is very different from the rest of the world. The first thing I believe is that we have to really grow a lot now through domestic activity, to domestic markets, to domestic trade. And the good news here is that when you have a population of 1 billion people, a young population, a population with a per capita revenue of, per capita income of $2,000, there's plenty of room to grow through internal activity and internal trade. And so it has to be a domestic-led. I'm not saying exports is not there. I'm just saying that if you really want to get jobs going at scale, you have to think of greater amount of domestic activity. The second thing, it has to be services-led. Services will really create the big jobs. But it's also, the question is, are those services going to be done by a few large companies or millions of small companies? And I believe that over time, it's really going to be more smaller companies which are interacting with each other, which will create jobs. And therefore, obviously, some of those small companies will be brought together by platforms, right? You'll have a lot of small manufacturers trading on a platform like Flipkart or something. You'll have a lot of small entrepreneurs owning vehicles on a platform like Ola. So you're going to see platforms aggregating, but there'll be really literally millions of small companies that will work together. And therefore, a lot of the work which I have done is really, how do you at population scale, in other words, how do you at a scale of 1 billion people streamline and reduce transaction costs, streamline and reduce interaction costs, how do you make things easier? And obviously one of the things there was identity, because India was a country which didn't have a very robust birth registration system. In many, more than half the children born don't have birth certificates, so they're born in a village, they're far away from the registration issues. And not having not being able to acknowledge who you are becomes whether you want to get a driver's license, get a passport, get a mobile connection, get an account, travel in a train, school, get a job. Everything is linked to identity. And we had a situation where millions of people didn't have that basic identity and therefore couldn't transact, in society. And this was perhaps less of an issue when people are not so mobile. If people sort of lived all their life in the same village, it didn't really matter. But increasingly, we are a mobile nation. Today, we have massive migration happening from rural to urban, from north to south, from east to west. And this is being driven by searching for jobs or driven by demographics, because the south and the west of India is aging, where the north and east of India is very young. And therefore, you see huge amount of migration across these things. And the moment you have a migrant mobile population, is how do these people, wherever they go, how do how do you create a mobile national which travels with them? And which is why the whole design as an online ID, as an ID that was on the ID that you could verify wherever you went, so that a young man from Bihar, if he goes to work in Kerala, he can still open a bank account or get a mobile connection. So fundamentally, we had to unlock ID from a physical paper, which was kind of in a particular region, to a nationally mobile identity. And that's what really is the fundamental principle of Aadhaar, is an online ID which can be verified across the world, across the country. In fact, across the world, but let's say across the country. And this is a way of reducing friction. It's enabling people to move around, get jobs, get access to education, get access to food, and therefore reducing friction in the society. And this is at scale, because it's about reducing friction for 1 billion people, so that they can move around and get things done. And I think that's a very important, one of the important principles that we had in how do we create identity for 1 billion people. The second thing is what Dr. Mashalka talked about. How do we make it simple for people to get access to products and services? Because increasingly, more and more products and services require you to prove who you are. And that is that in the language of financial language is called know your customer. You do something called a KYC. And if you didn't have an ID, you obviously can't do a KYC. But even if you had an ID, which is a paper-based ID, it takes days often to do your KYC. It's so complicated to do these things. And what the Aadhaar platform did was created an electronic KYC. So you could use your Aadhaar number, you could do an online authentication using your finger or your iris or your OTP or your face, and you could then tell the Aadhaar system to give your name and address to the bank or to the mobile company, and that was the KYC. So you could do a KYC in 2 minutes or 5 minutes. And this KYC actually opens up, opportunity for everyone to participate in the economy. As Dr. Mashalka mentioned, Jio was a great example of using electronic KYC to get 50, 100 million customers in a matter of months, which if it had been a paper-based system would have taken much longer. The same thing in the banking system. In the last 5 years, 330 million bank accounts have been opened. A large number of them using this electronic KYC. So that enables you to do it very fast. So the belief that I have and many of us have is that if you are going to create jobs in India, you have to do it through enabling millions of small businesses. And if you want millions of small businesses to flourish, you have to make it easy for them to transact with people, transact with each other. And if you have to make it easy for them to transact with each other, then you have to reduce transaction costs and make things simple. And things like identity and all are very much part of that. Similarly, so what the identity does is what Dr. Mashalka mentioned. It makes it paperless. Today, for example, 600 million people have linked their ID number to the bank. India runs the world's largest cash transfer. Literally hundreds of thousands of crores electronically into bank accounts. And all the that you keep hearing about, universal basic income, farmers, today the budget talked about farmers getting 6,000 rupees. All that is only possible because they have an ID, they have a bank, and electronically in real time you can transfer money to them. bank account. And that so unless you have this foundational things, you can't really do all these big ideas that people talk about. So another big thing which we have done in India is improving payments. I don't know how many of you have heard or seen something called UPI, Unified Payment Interface, which has been developed by the NPCI, and I was an advisor on that initiative. And today, it's the world's most sophisticated payment system. Any mobile phone, to any mobile phone, any bank account to any bank account in real time. And this platform in October of 2017 did 100,000 transactions. Last month, December, it did 620 million transactions. And I believe that it will reach 1 billion transactions in the next 4 months. This is again another example of how do we get entire population to have more efficient payments so that 1 billion people can make payments easily, faster, cheaper, better. And it allows business to commute. If a vendor can receive a digital payment while she's selling vegetables, that will help her to get more things going. And let me how then we have to think about AI in this world. As I said, the Western narrative on AI is AI. There's a truck driver or a doctor. I think of AI very differently, and because fundamentally a different problem is that how do you educate 1 billion people when there are not enough teachers? How do you give healthcare to 1 billion people when there are not enough doctors? How do you give quick justice to 1 billion people when there are not enough courts and judges? That's our problem. The capacity of the system to deliver on what people want is really not there yet. And therefore, can we think of AI not as a job destroyer, but as something that allows you to amplify your ability to service 1 billion people? In other words, you may not be able to have so many, and the reason why this is so important is because of time. If the real challenge in Indian education is now, because now is the time when you have the maximum number of young people. We have what's called peak child. It will keep declining now with fertility rates going down. And therefore, we don't have the luxury of time of waiting for 30, 40 years to improve our school system, get better teachers. All that is going to take time, but our challenge is now. And therefore, can we think of using big data and AI to improve the quality of learning that we can deliver through technology, such that even if the teacher is all right, the teacher's abilities get amplified by technology. So that if they have a class of 40 kids and each child is different, each child is a different level, today it's very difficult for a teacher to manage. But tomorrow, if technology can allow the teacher to really look at the personal situation of each child, what they're learning and not learning, then they can deliver better education. Similarly, if you want to deliver healthcare, if you have a health worker in a village and they have an AI-based diagnostic in their smartphone, then perhaps they can provide better diagnosis at the point of contact, the point of diagnostics. And if the case is really serious, then they can refer it to a higher, sort of a regional hospital. Or in the judicial system, can we use AI to study the cases, look at the patterns, and figure out how to give better judgment so that judges can do it faster. So I think when we think of AI in India, we should not think of it as removing truck drivers or removing somebody else. We have to think of it as a way to reduce the cost of prediction in large fields like education, health, and judicial, and many others, where traditional methods of expecting us to deliver services to those people will not be done, because we'll never be able to have enough doctors, enough teachers, and enough judges. And therefore, we have to think very differently. So I think I would have a much more positive view of AI, but we have to think in a different way on how we can use it to address our challenges. And I think that's what some of the work that's going on now in India is about: how to use AI in a positive way to solve these large problems. And then let me finally come to the role of data and jobs and economy and so on. So today, one of the biggest challenges facing the world today is data. Data is becoming all pervasive. Data is becoming pervasive because data is suddenly taken off because some points of data generation. I mean, smartphone, you're generating lots of data, and 3.5 billion smartphones. Tomorrow, 100 sensors in every car, a sensor in a fridge, 100 sensors in your home. Every one of those sensors is generating data. So there's an explosion of data which is around the world. And historically, when we have thought about data, we have thought about it from 2 points. What do companies do with that data, and what do governments do with that data? And the big debate around the world is that what do companies do with data? And so many of the issues that you see today with social media is about what is happening with the data, what's the privacy issue, is it being monetized, are you being sold advertisements, is some foreign power meddling in your elections using this data. So all the conversation is because of the way companies are accumulating data, and this is only going to become more and more a bigger issue as this happen. The second issue is what do governments do. US is all about companies and trying to grapple with this issue of so many market data and what do we do now. The other thing is I've learned that this data is very, very useful, but they use it for doing law and order and so on. So the other question is, how do you make sure governments don't use this data for surveillance? But the real question to my mind is we certainly have to make sure that governments don't misuse data. We have to make sure that companies don't compromise your privacy and so on. But the real issue is, can we think about data as a means of empowerment? Can we use data to actually improve people's lives? And that's where I think the Indian model of data is very unique, because India is again the only country in the world which has an architecture for empowering people with their own data. And the reason why we are able to do that is because we have identity, and therefore you can verify somebody online through a public platform, and therefore you know it's that person, and therefore you can release data to that person. We have the technology for getting real-time data from different sources. We have the architecture, and now with the data privacy law to enable this by law. And many of our regulators, like the Reserve Bank and other financial regulators, are actually thinking through what should be the way for what they call as account aggregators, who aggregate data on your behalf. So to give you a good example, and I'll come back to the jobs thing. I said that the jobs in India will be created by millions of small companies. Each company will hire a few more people, and that's how jobs will get created. But it's the small company which has difficulty in getting access to loans and credit. And so inevitably credit and loans go to large companies and not to small guys. And the reason why the small guys don't get loans is because of information asymmetry. You don't know enough about their business to give them a loan. You don't know if they'll get your money back, and therefore they don't get loans. But tomorrow, every individual and every business is going to generate a digital footprint. So every time you transact, you'll have a digital footprint. And then that data, if that company or individual has access to, then he can offer it to somebody else, and that lender can decide to give him a loan or not. So today in India, for example, if I'm a small business, I have my payments data, which I get because I do digital payments. I have the data of the income tax I paid because the income tax system is completely automated. I have data of my invoices because the GST system is completely automated. I have data on all my borrowings and because the bank statement is there. I have data on my corporate affairs because the Ministry of Corporate Affairs system is completely automated. So all these systems now are data on my PAN, because my PAN card is, my PAN can be verified online. So what can happen today is that a business can get data from all these various sources and give it to the bank, say, look, here's my record, here's the invoices I had, here's paid, here's the filings I've done. So why don't you loan, because I'm now a good credit risk. So this is a case where using data to empower a small loan or to get credit. The same thing will happen to consumers in financial services. If tomorrow I want to give healthcare, if I can give them their data, access it easily wherever they are, then I can get my report from the lab, I can get my ECG, and I can then go to a specialist and get my guys and give to the specialist to get a second opinion. I can sort of cut the cost of getting healthcare. So we have a situation which is unique to India, which is India is the only country in the world which has a data empowerment architecture which allows people to use their data for their benefit, to get a loan, to get education, to get better skills, to get better jobs. And this is even more important because in the Western world saw the rise of this big data in the last 15, 20 years. So they were already well off, per capita income maybe $40,000. So in the Western world, people were economically rich before they became, and therefore the business models that emerged was advertising. To have data about them, you could always sell them an ad. And therefore, a lot of the revenue internet world is really advertising. But in countries like India, to be data rich before the because the moment, even if the person's per capita dollars, once he starts using a smartphone, digital payments, he's generating as much data as the guy in Baltimore. So fundamentally, Indians will be data rich before they're economically well off. And therefore, if we can develop this architecture where we flip the data around and empower each and every one to be able to use his data for improving his life, that is then going to create the cycle of economic activity which is going to create those jobs. So the jobs will be, because millions of companies are able to get better loans, millions of people are able to get better skills, then they can participate in this whole economic cycle, and that's how job creation will happen. So I think we have to fundamentally rethink all these things. The good news is that many of the pieces of this infrastructure are already in place. They're in place at population scale. It's 1 billion people. These systems have been designed using completely open source, highly scalable architecture. For example, today our Aadhaar system does 1.2 billion authentications a month. It does 3.4 billion KYCs a year. UPI does 620 million payments a month. So all these are really population scale systems. And I think if we put this infrastructure in place, then we'll have a new paradigm of economic activity, which is domestically driven jobs, service driven jobs, millions of small companies, all interacting very smoothly because of these interfaces and leveraging data and empowering themselves to improve the lives of everyone so that we are a better nation. Thank you very much.